genocide, ethnic riots, succession, irredentism, exclusion. So let's consider all of these one by one. This is a very helpful summary provided. So let's have a look at what are the roots of ethnic violence. So Milton Esman makes the point that ethnic conflict can only occur in ethnically plural societies. If a society is ethnically homogeneous, like Iceland, or in Southeast Asia, we might say a place like Korea, which has got a remarkable amount of ethnic homogeneity. Ethnic conflicts do not occur. However, pluralism per se does not lead to conflict. There are many ethnically diverse societies in which groups live in relative harmony. So ethnic pluralism, precisely how pluralism was established, can speak to the potential for particular types of conflict to emerge. Identifying 5 ways in which ethnic pluralism arises have been identified. So here are the 5 ways. Conquest is a situation in which one ethnic group invades the territory of another, defeats the inhabitants of the territory, and takes control of it. The area of colonialism witnessed this phenomenon on a vast scale. Thus, the largest empire in the world was the British, and it began by taking control of Ireland and then North America. That would eventually become the United States and Canada. And you know the history of the British Empire, that the sun never set on it. The second, after conquest, so conquest was a big part of Siamese expansion into Lana and parts of the Lao-speaking parts of the northeast and the Malay-speaking parts of the south, as well as the Khmer-speaking parts of present-day southern Isan, Sudan, etc. So the second type is annexation. Annexation means incorporating territory. Annexation refers to the incorporation of some territorial entity into another, generally larger one. For example, Finland was annexed by the Russian Empire in 1809, but it was forced to cede its previous control of Finland. 2 more recent examples from the Indian annexation of the small island of Goa off its coast in the Indian Ocean, and Indonesia's annexation of East Timor near the end of last century. Saddam Hussein, the then ruler of Iraq, attempted to annex Kuwait. So there is conquest, there is annexation. Settler migrations involve the movement of ethnic groups elsewhere. What makes this type of movement distinctive is that it is done with the intention of establishing a permanent residence and assumes control of the area. So he mentions Dutch settlements to South Africa and Jewish Zionists shifting to Palestine. Voluntary migration is another cause, and this involves the movement of people across international boundaries with the intention of permanent settlement. What makes this type of movement different from other settler migrations is that it is voluntary migrants, have no intention of assuming control of an area. On the contrary, their goal is to seek being incorporated into the society. Theories of incorporation will be discussed in Chapter 5. So, several countries in the world are largely the result of migration, widespread migration. This includes the United States, and we've talked about this in previous lectures, with the most diverse population in the world, as well as countries like Australia and Canada. In what is known as the Great Migration, over 50 million people migrated from Europe to the United States during the 19th and the early 20th century. And this has been described as the largest ever international free movement of people. The current era is also an age of migration, with current estimates putting the number of people living out their country of origin as 20 million. Coerced migration occurs when people are forced to move from one territory to another, and the best example of this is the Atlantic slave trade, which brought 11 million Africans to North and South America and the Caribbean in between from the 16th to 19th century. So this is the largest coerced migration in world history. There's also been other examples, such as indentured labour of Indian workers to Fiji and the Caribbean by the British, and the expulsion of Jews from present-day Spain and Portugal in the 15th century. There is no one widely accepted theory of ethnic conflict, and scholars in the field often point that such conflict has received less theoretical attention than one might have expected. If there is one thing that most scholars agree today, it is that they dismiss the idea that ethnic conflict is rooted in long entrenched primordial ethnic identities and relations. An older school of thought, and a view that one can still find widely expressed by the person in the street, is that ancient animosities are the result of a natural ethnocentrism characterized by ethnic groups. My group is better than your group. This perspective tends to treat cultures as unchanging and as playing a highly deterministic role in affecting people's thoughts and actions. The alternatives characteristic of contemporary currents of thought stress the role that interest, material and ideological, play in generating conflict, specifically when interests of one group are perceived to be at odds with the interests of another, instead of viewing the reasons for ethnic attachments as rooted in deep-seated held emotional bonds that are rooted in kinship networks. The alternatives stress the more immediate social reasons for ethnic solidarities within groups and for ethnic conflict between groups. Built on these various ways in which the establishment of ethnically pluralistic societies occur are different levels of ethnic inequality, defined in terms of access to power and economic resources. Certainly in the cases of conquest and annexation, those doing the conquering and annexing have more power and control of economic resources than groups being conquered and annexed. Though not quite as clear, settler migrants generally have the advantage over indigenous people they seek to control. In contrast, coerced migrants are at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the members of the receiving society. Most voluntary migrants are also at a disadvantage, though in the case of what has become known as the brain drain immigrants, those possessing professional credentials or business acumen, the disadvantages may be either minimal or in some instances non-existent. In societies where there are power imbalances between ethnic groups, we often see class differences between these ethnic groups as well, since those with power are able to translate that power into control over a larger share of economic resources. To the extent that this is true, ethnic differences manifest themselves as class differences. To study this relationship, Horowitz compares ethnic groups and societies that contain ranked groups versus those composed of unranked groups. In Horowitz's typology, ranked groups represented a hierarchical ordering of ethnic groups along class lines in situations characterized by the presence of unranked groups. Parallel ethnic groups are located side by side in the class order. In societies defined by the prevalence of ranked groups, stratification is synonymous with the ethnic membership. Horowitz argues that the relationship between ethnic groups and class is important to consider in understanding if, when, and how ethnic conflict arises, develops, and evolves over time. Ethnic conflict can occur within societies organized on the basis of ranked or unranked groups. However, in societies with ranked ethnic groups, the ethnic conflict are more likely to fall along class lines, highlighting the differences in material and cultural advantages in ethnic groups.